Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brent Venables, the Oklahoma Sooners continue to work their way through spring practice. And if you are an Oklahoma fan sitting here in the middle of March, checking in and kind of getting plugged in, if you will, to what's going on in spring practice for this Oklahoma team, I think the general thought is you're kind of hearing all the things you wanted to hear coming out of this Oklahoma program heading into 2025. And I think what's so exciting for Oklahoma fans is look, I don't think many of us know what this team is going to look like in 2025, but we do know that if some things come together for Oklahoma, generally in the pass catcher room and on the offensive line, this team's ceiling in terms of being a legitimate contender in the SEC, it's there. And there's just not a lot of teams in the SEC that I think have the firepower to make that claim. I think Oklahoma is one of them. I want to be very clear that I'm not getting up here in the middle of March and picking Oklahoma to win this conference. But I am saying that we had some question marks about this Oklahoma team heading into spring practice, and you are starting to hear some positive intel that goes a long way in answering some of those question marks as we roll into the 2025 year. I want to start again at the quarterback position, but kind of give some general thoughts about what we're hearing from spring practice and why I think Oklahoma fans should be excited about some of the things that we are hearing from this Oklahoma program. Now, before we get into it, as always, the Oklahoma fans, vibe check. Would love to get a vibe check from the Oklahoma fans in the comment section. Look, if you're an Oklahoma fan listening to this, chances are that all of y'all are kind of plugged in terms of what's going on during spring practice. Would love to hear, kind of the confidence level around this program heading into the 2025 year. Appreciate the Oklahoma fans rocking with the boys, whether we're talking recruiting, whether we're talking spring practice. This is a team that, to me, is fascinating to monitor heading into 2025, and all the support y'all have shown has been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it, and let's just start with some general thoughts. The Oklahoma fans who've been rocking with the boys the last couple of weeks, we've been taking specific looks at this Oklahoma program, but we haven't really taken a bird's eye view approach in terms of, hey, where do we sit going into 2025. I want to start with the reasons to believe the positive momentum that you have going into the 2025 year, and it starts at the quarterback position. We're going to talk a little bit more about John Mateer in just a second. When you have a quarterback like John Mateer, you give yourself a chance to win a lot of football games, but not only is there a massive upgrade at the quarterback position, you're also getting a massive, maybe even bigger upgrade going from Seth Littrell to a guy like Ben Arbuckle. And so you look at the two most important things about an offense in general in the college football landscape: quarterback play, offensive coordinator, offensive play caller. Oklahoma is taking massive steps in the right direction going into 2025. I think the second thing that is, popping out to me regarding this Oklahoma team in spring practice is the wide receiver room, the wide receiver play, I should say, should be very much improved from what we saw in the 2024 year. Now, you look at Oklahoma's wide receiver room last year was just, for lack of better terms, a graveyard. You just kept, the guys were dropping like flies. If this Oklahoma wide receiver room stays healthy, this should be a significantly better room than what we saw about in the middle of October in terms of this Oklahoma wide receiver room. Then you go to the defense, and we've talked a lot about the defense. It probably starts with Brent Venables, taking back command of this Oklahoma defense. And as I was prepping this episode, one of the things came to my mind is that does Oklahoma have the best coordinator duo that you see in the country? Because we know that there's probably not a better defensive play caller in the country than Brent Venables. When he's dialed in, calling plays on the defensive side of the football, in my opinion, nobody's better. And there's a long sample size from his time at Clemson that tells us that. And then you look at Ben Arbuckle and say he was probably my favorite offensive coordinator that was on the market during this offseason. I look at it and say you're better at the quarterback spot. You're significantly better at both coordinator positions. And then I think lastly, and we've talked about this a lot too, I think you should feel great about the Oklahoma defense for a couple of different reasons. One, when you play opposite a better offense that's going to hold on to the football more, that is going to turn the football over less, your defense is just inherently going to get better. They're not going to be put in as many bad spots. They're going to not be on the football field as long as they were last year. That's one driving force. And I think the second driving force is this is kind of the year where it feels like Brent Venables has his guys in. Going into the 2025 year, specifically in the front seven, it's just loaded with blue chip talent. Whether it's guys that Brent Venables brought in through the high school recruiting ranks or guys that you've brought in through the transfer portal, this front seven, from a personnel standpoint, is probably the best front seven that Brent Venables has had at Oklahoma. And even though you lose guys like Danny Stutzman, you lose guys like Billy Bowman, I don't think it's crazy to say this Oklahoma defense gets better going into the 2025 year, especially when you factor in that you're going to have a better offense and you're going to have Brent Venables calling the plays and really having command of this Oklahoma defense. Now, the thing you want to start with is, does Oklahoma have the best quarterback play in the SEC? I don't know if I'm prepared to make that statement just yet because I like Lenore Sellers a lot. I like DJ Lagway a lot. I like Garrett Nussmeier a lot. But there's a lot of other programs, perennial powerhouses in the SEC, teams like Alabama and teams like Georgia, where you got significant question marks about the quarterback play. What makes John Mateer special is really one thing, maybe two things. He's a quarterback that doesn't need as much help around him. And what I mean by that is he's the engine of the Oklahoma offense. There's a lot of quarterbacks, and I think, Garrett Nussmeier is probably a great example of this at LSU. Garrett Nussmeier is probably not going to be a great quarterback if you do not put the adequate pieces around him. Now, if you do that, Garrett Nussmeier can carve a defense up. We all know that. John Mateer is one of those quarterbacks that he's the engine. He's the one who elevates everybody. And that's what you're hearing out of spring practice. The pass catchers are playing better because they got better quarterback play. The run game is getting stimulated because you got a legitimate dynamite athlete in the backfield in terms of what he can do as a runner of the football. That's what I love most about the John Mateer edition, is you knew that you probably weren't going to have an elite wide receiver room. You probably weren't going to have an elite offensive line. And so if you wanted this Oklahoma offense to take a step, you had to do two things. One, you had to get a better play caller in there, and you had to get a quarterback that could make things happen on his own. Oklahoma did both of those things. Number two, and again, this has been a common theme here, is I got to raise my hand and say, hey, I might have been wrong about my evaluation of these Oklahoma wide receivers that they grabbed in the transfer portal. Giovanni Gibson, I had big question marks. Can he come from the FCS level to the SEC and be a difference maker? From what it sounds like early on in spring practice, he is clearly the wide receiver too. Deion Burks, the wide receiver one, Giovanni Gibson, the wide receiver two. Then Isaiah Satanga, another guy that I kicked it around at Arkansas, probably wasn't in an ideal offense. We knew he had the physical juice to be a difference maker. Now he's coming into Oklahoma. He sounds like a guy that's going to be a legitimate difference maker for Oklahoma in the 2025 year. We had question marks around how good the pass catchers were going to be around John Mateer. Those question marks are getting melted away a little bit if you're an Oklahoma fan. I think the last thing that you're talking about here, and I think the biggest hinge, if this Oklahoma offensive line does not improve, the last 9 minutes of us talking about this Oklahoma team probably doesn't matter, because you can't win at the level Oklahoma expects to win at with an offensive line that you trotted out in 2024. The biggest thing that I would like to see from Oklahoma going forward over the next couple of weeks and really months going into fall camp is get your rotation figured out early. I think one of the biggest problems that you had with Oklahoma's offensive line last year is, one, you probably just didn't have enough good players that weren't ready to play. Number two is, even going back to spring practice 12 months ago, it was just musical chairs. Guys were getting banged up. Guys were changing positions. Then you go to the 2024 year and say, well, Fabechi was really the only guy that played every single game for Oklahoma at the same position. And then everybody else just kind of getting rotated in, getting banged up, getting healthy again. It was musical chairs up front. You can have a good offensive line from a personnel standpoint, but if you don't have that continuity throughout 12 plus games of a season, chances are he ain't going to be that good of a line, ain't good of an offensive line. What stands out here is I think Oklahoma, from a pure personnel standpoint, that might be okay. I mean, you look at guys like Jacob Sexton or a guy like Eddie Pierre-Louis or a guy like Jake Taylor, Michael Fasusi, Ryan Foji. There's a lot of blue chip offensive linemen that we see in this unit. And then you're hearing some great things about Derek Simmons in spring practice too at right tackle. I look at it and say, if you can stay healthy and figure out your best five, it's hard to see Oklahoma's offensive line not taking some sort of step in the right direction, because I know you have the players. I think Coach Bill B is a good coach. He's going to have to show it to us in 2025. If they can figure out a way to have an offensive line that is just average in the SEC. I don't think there's many Oklahoma fans who are sitting here in early March and expecting an Oklahoma offensive line to be a top 5 unit in the country. But can you just be a solid offensive line? Maybe the best word to use is, can you not be a liability up front? If you told me that, if I had a crystal ball and someone told me, hey, Oklahoma's offensive line will be solid, it significantly impacts the way I look at this football team. And from what you're hearing out of spring practice is, hey, we are maybe looking the part up on the offensive line. This is going to be a really fun team. I do think that the addition of Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer, from what we're hearing in spring practice, significantly changes the landscape of this Oklahoma offense. Got a lot of confidence in BV working with this defense. There's some reason to believe in Oklahoma going into 2025. Now, we'll continue to monitor the spring practice intel. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.